Ai pā e tō mātai matua nui te rangi i e hoi ana whakaaro nui anō ai mahara ia tātou mātou i ngā wā katoa ai tau i te pō whakamoe miti ai tā i hiuhi mene ka piti hono ka tātai hono ko rātau rā te mate ki a rātau ka piti hono ka tātai hono ko tātau koau anō te kāno hiora kara hui mai anō ai i ngā kōrero whakataunga kre me ngā kōrero taunaha tūpuna taunaha whenua o Tahumakakanuimatua o Tutura Hapu iwi i roto tēnei wā kai te mihi atu ahakoa rā tō tātou mātou whai haere i ngā kōrero tūtata mai nei e nā o ngā kōrero kai te kaha te hono mai he pākahatanga mai anō o e rā kōrero pērā tonu rā i ngā kōrero o te tiriti o he whakaputanga i e rā tūāhuatanga katoa o roto. Me ngā mea katoa tino hahanei, whai kiko ai, whai tikanga ai ki ngā tūāhuatanga e whai haere nei e tātou mātou i roto i te wā. Ne? I roto te wā, tō tātou mātou e hia nei meki e mate nui rawa nei i roto i tēnei wā ko iei nei ngā mea whai haere nā e tātou mātou ko iei nei ngā mea tino nunui ki a tātou mātou ko i anō mātou whai haere nei e nā kōrero roto tēnei wā tonu nei ai pā e tātou mā, kai te mihi atu tēnā rā tātou, nau mai haere, piki ka ke hara mai haere. Tēnā rā tātou mauri ora, kahuri, yes, right off the bat where we left off from last time. We were running through the Declaration of Independence, he whakaputanga, and we were having a good look at some of the detail there. What's important to note about some of the detail there, and that you would have picked up straight away from our kōrero last week. Of course, we're in TeTiriti&DeclarationOf this time. And yeah, looking forward to lots and lots of work happening in the north there, but then yeah, it's going to be the same all over the motu from right throughout all our claims very, very soon. And so but e tatama, we just getting those details right is a bit of a mission. So for those of you who might get a hold of similar kōrero on he whakaputanga that I'm going to be sharing with you today, the introduction on he whakaputanga, the Declaration of Independence, where a lot of the kōrero, you can tell a lot of the kōrero that has come from, in particular, Crown or Pākehā authors or researchers or the like, who have a narrowed down version of what actually happened and the actual details regards what happened, because they will all follow always the Crown side of the story. And the Crown side of the story is obviously a Crown narrative side. It's one that they stuck to right through, and it's obvious right through all the writings. All you get, I mean, like for instance, whenever they talk about the North, they talk about Ngāpuhi, and yeah, the North is far more varied, and there's a lot more tribal groupings in the north than just Ngāpuhi, and that's what you find in all the writings, etc. We never get all of the background kōrero. We just get a narrowed down focus on whatever the kaupapa is, and a crown angle, mostly a crown narrative on everything. And this is why today we're going to continue where we left off last week. Our kōrero on whānau is going to commence. I was actually going to do that today. I was going to commence that today, but I decided no, I'd use all of this time for he whakaputanga, because we need that. We used up an extensive amount of time last week on discussing some of the issues that can come up when you're dealing with groups that have sort of lost that. They've sort of lost that reality of exactly what whānau is. They think whānau is just a brotherhood, sisterhood and a gang, and that's that. But that's not the only reason why we're going to cover whānau, but whānau is a big thing to us, and always has been as a super tribal, spiritual, cultural people. We've always held the whānau unit as one of the primary units of our culture that we are still hugely, highly dependent upon, and we are also hoping that this encourages not just the gangs, but all the other people out there who might have a little bit of a confused or vague notion today on exactly what that is. Whānau is family, but we're going to look at all the context around that, around exactly what that is. And first of all, what we're going to do, that's down in TeTaiHauauruAukatiTai once we get there, because we'll do the same as we did for TeTaiHauauruAukatiTai, and we'll cover possibly half of our kōrero for that time on the declaration, and dedicate the rest to whānau, because it's such a big thing and it's come up. And let's face it, it's been a part of what has been, I guess, for want of a better way of describing it, the ruin of my life. I mean, my own elder siblings who were always jealous and could not bear to look at how traditionally these things were set, and that there were far more greater positions and views and standpoints on a lot of the different traditional areas of life that affected our whānau. I'll put whānau there, because where mum and dad was concerned, yes, we had a whānau, but where they were concerned, we never ever really did. Okay, see, so there was always two worlds going on in the one world, and what you ended up with is actually a mob hub. That's what you ended up with, see? Because the older siblings always got their way, but they got their way through the mob or through tūhoe. This is how they could try to express that they've got some strength or something to offer. Problem is, they went too far. They went too far. They took all that too far, and they thought that they had to be the big chief outright, and they weren't. And it's obvious, because they've, the whole whānau is, it's in a devastating state. The whānau, it's not only me that's left. There's all sorts of turmoil going on in that whānau today. And these elder siblings have done some real damage in there. Why? Because they haven't operated on those simple traditional means by which whānau was always that primary catalyst for growth, for development, but for everybody, for respect, for aroha, for all those sorts of things, the respect of differences, growing within tikanga tika me te kawa. All those things begin within whānau. But what we're going to do in TeTaiHauauruAukatitai, I won't go on with this for too long, just briefly, what we're going to do is start off by looking at what whānau isn't. Okay? We're going to look at what whānau isn't. And a lot of those things that are happening today in a lot of our dysfunctional, a lot of our whānau that are struggling, a lot of our whānau that particularly, most of the whānau that I know that are in the dysfunctional category are mostly cultural, spiritual, hapu me ko te ariki. Okay, they're all our whānau, the ones that I know mostly. Yeah, okay, but there are lots of other whānau too. Let's not just cut it down to gang. Let's not just cut it down to our cultural, spiritual, super tribal people having dysfunctional whānau, but also the wider mainstream. There are dysfunctional whānau and family happening out there as well. Okay, so hopefully there's something to learn for everybody. Yeah, sorry to just centre on the gangs last week. I did that, but I did that because we were particularly hurt by a lot of the outcomes with the gangs. I think in particular the Black Power is pretty hurt and are trying to get involved in talks with us. I don't think our stance will change though. I think for what we've had to put up with, there's no go, I think, there. And besides, it's in particular held up a lot of our great work, and we'd rather do our great work rather than focus on gang problems, because that's all we end up with. At the end of the day, there's a whole lot of gang problems. And when we realised that was all we had and that was all we were going to get, and everything was going to build in that way, and there's going to be more and more gang problems the longer we stuck at it, we needed to exit that situation at some point and find the best point and best standpoint from which to do that. Make our decision around that on what we wanted to do about it and stick to it. Okay, so there are some Black Power that are not too happy about that, but they will have to understand our position. They will have to realise too that we're not silly people, but we understand too that once the gangs come in and as soon as trouble starts, they're not to know. But we're going to shut it down straight away if we ever do give in to that. But I don't think we will. I think we will. I think mostly the top whānau, our most senior whānau, will handle that one. I don't think we'll even take it into Runanga because we won't need to. The actual whānau that suffered the most from all of this gang, they're really just gang problems. It's their own problems within themselves, and they keep struggling within these problems, and then they bring it to us, and then they cause us all heaps of problems and stuff like that too, and it's just ghastly. Yeah, that's why I don't want to go into the particular issues, because they're absolutely ghastly. Okay, and just ridiculous to go on about, because there's some of the worst cases you might ever hear about publicly. Okay, in the news or anything like that. Some cases like that, when cases like that start coming up, what we tried to do was gain control and start to try and manage things, and more and more things kept getting away from us, and I think in the end someone had to call it quits and shut everything down. And once that was done, we were all in the same space, we were all on the same page, and so we shut down immediately. The decision was made to cut out all the gangs, all our territories. We weren't too willing to try again. Any little bit of trouble from any gang, and we're going to ship them out by law. These regions, where our land regions are, they are in particular Tahumakakanuimatua, so we have every right. Tahumakakanuimatua o Tutura, so we have every right and by law to remove you if you're not complying with anything. Either we remove you or you go to jail. Okay, one of the two. Okay, and we just are not going to put up with any more. Within 5 minutes, pretty much, things stopped being whānau. Yeah, that's how it gets. And if that's how it's going to get with all the gangs, then they're not worth trying for, really. That's how we see it. So we want things how we need it to be. We need it for the majority of the people. If only the gangs would have a good look at who they're dealing with and working with, and realise that there are a lot more people out there in the world, and they all think differently. See, these are some of the things they don't understand. We all think differently to the gangs. We don't believe the gang life is the way to go. Okay, and there's millions of us. See, this is what they don't realise. And because the troubles go on, and they build and build and build. Next thing, you've got a crescendo of people who need to go to jail for 30 to 50 years sometimes. That's how much you end up with. That's what you end up with, and that's pretty bad. Just mentioning that time on there is pretty bad. If we have a good hard look at things from that sort of point of view. And some of these guys, some of these people actually deserve a lot more than 50 years. Let's put it that way. Okay, because they just get things confused. They don't understand. They're pretty frustrated within whatever struggles they've got, and then they try and take it out on you. And apparently, this is what we understand, the way that the moves that they make in the process, where we end up getting hurt and violated or abused or whatever happens in the process, is that we're supposed to be able to handle that and accept that. This is their understanding of the situation. Okay? And it just doesn't work like that, eh? It doesn't work like that. We don't have to handle anything that is abusive or violent or sexually abusive or whatever the violence is. We do not, and I repeat, to any gang out there, we do not have to learn how to handle that rubbish. You understand me? You will learn that everybody else in the world does not have to put up with rubbish like that. And we will not. And we will not stand for any of that. No matter what, threats, you name it, we won't stand for any of that. And it's all of us against you. And we don't mind that. But what we want the gangs to understand is that us against you, there's a huge imbalance in those odds, because all our millions against you, you're probably goners, I would say. Okay, the gangs are probably goners, I would say. Okay, now that's our stance, though. That's our stance. But we've tried the fair way. We've tried, without judgment or anything like that. We've tried a fair way to try and work with them and try to be whānau. And I admit to sometimes even enjoying it and even ending up looking like them sometimes. And I'm not really worried about things like that. But the fact of the matter is that I'd never be gang, because I'd never want to. My heart is set on other things in life, more important than gangs, and things like that. So when we get to TeTaiHauauruAukatiTai, we'll start our talks on that. Firstly, on what whānau is not. Okay? And you'll be surprised. You'll be surprised what customarily whānau was to our tūpuna mātua. And what a lot of these gangs, and actually much of the mainstream public, would actually relate to the whole of our kōrero. Much of the mainstream public, in terms that what they will note is that a lot of these things that we bring up about what a whānau is not, what a whānau is not e tātou mā, they're going to actually realise that what's going to smack them in the face is that a lot of these things are actually happening in their whānau, and if they are, they shouldn't be. Okay? That's the first thing that we're going to cover. And then we're going to start to slowly but gradually bring in some traditional ideas and ways that our tūpuna mātua lived by in terms of living within whānau. When it comes to hapu iwi, for instance, this is what a lot of my elder siblings got wrong. When it comes to other hapu iwi from outside of our region, they need to realise that their law and order only pertains to them, and it stays outside of our region. See, they applied a lot of law and order, but they applied the wrong ones. See? And this is what ruined a lot of what they did. They also were not the chiefs. Okay, they were seniors, but they were not the chief. E hara rātau I te ariki, e hara rātau I te rangatira. Okay, those were the other things, and yet they were trying to make out that they had all the goods and that they could run that side of things and actually be the chief. They weren't that either. Okay? And yeah, years and years ago, in fact about even 35 odd years ago, they had gone too far. Okay, so you can just imagine where we've come to, and why the actual whānau that we used to have is so distraught now. It's, just totally destroyed. And it's because these siblings just won't stand to reason. And they're too selfish, they're too mob, they won't stand to reason, they won't listen because they're too arrogant. And this is one of the worst sides of gangs that we've found, is the arrogance. It's, far too much. There's far too much arrogance in there. I mean, they're worse than the Crown, worse than politicians. There's a lot of arrogant politicians out there who actually think they have the right way. And most of them actually don't. Okay? Most of them actually don't. But then that covers a broad section of thought and ideas and theories, etc., and even philosophy. But we won't go into all that. We're just going to cut to the chase a lot of the time. We'll cut to the chase a lot of the time and make sure that people understand what a whānau is not, and our ideas, what we're talking about when we talk about whānau. Okay, we talk about whānau. We love whānau, the whānau unit, because it's where everything begins. Okay? The entirety of creation is based around whānau. Okay, we need to understand the importance, the significance of those things to us culturally, spiritually, and super tribally. All of those things. So we'll slowly go into that and finish off on those positives, because that's really what we want to hear. But you're going to hear a lot of negatives to start off with. And I do believe that we're right. We have discussed that kaupapa, and I think we're right that we need to start off with the negative, because people need to be basically smacked in the face with the reality and the truth of exactly what's happening out there for families, and not just gang families, but public-wide, mainstream-wide. A lot of families in a pretty bad state. Now, but there are ones that are in a pretty good state too. Let's not leave them out. So a lot of, when we cut to the chase on the positive, a lot of their good qualities are going to come out there too. So they'll realise that too, and they'll go, oh wow, yeah, we do that in our whānau, yeah, we do this, we understand that and this. Te mea. Okay? And so, yeah. Hopefully those elder siblings understand that they've got to stop trying to also blame others for their situation. Their situation established, developed because of their own decision making. Their decisions to do this, do that, to scheme the way that they have, all of their plots and schemes never came off. They failed everywhere. They failed everywhere, and they're still trying to carry on like they've got something to prove within what they're trying to achieve. They were always going to fail, as far as we're concerned. And some people are saying that they may have been set up to fail, but they actually don't believe that that was the end result that they wanted. What they wanted was for those people, for our older siblings, to actually see that the right way to succeed was actually to leave the situation that they had for themselves and actually take the path that we were offering. And that's all I've been doing. I couldn't do it within the whānau, so I pulled out with my whānau officially. I pulled out of that whānau, and they've basically fallen down flat on their face. See? Of course I got the blame for that, but look, hopefully they understand by now that I'm not the blame for that. The older siblings are. That started everything, and that destroyed everything, that ruined everything, that went on a rant, if you like, with a non-whānau, non-traditional, confused, vague idea of exactly what it is they were going to try to achieve, how they were going to get there, and what it is that they needed to do in order to get there. Okay, so they've utterly failed. But that's whānau in a couple of weeks' time. So we'll start to talk around that particular kaupapa. First of all, on what whānau is not. And then a lot of those understandings about what whānau is. Very, very important kaupapa, that one. But let's get into he whakaputanga before we start to lose our understanding of that kōrero, our comprehension of a lot of the Pākehā Crown writings of old, which is where a lot of this kōrero, sorry about that, but I chose this kōrero on purpose. On purpose, because I knew that it was dominated by Pākehā and Crown research or thought, and therefore a Crown narrative that I could nitpick and take apart, because I actually know the truth, the facts. And the facts are that it was never centrally Ngā Puhi in the north, and that what we have here is not a plea for protection to the Crown of Westminster. There was never any plea like that, and yet they go on and on about that. You have a good look at TeTiriti and there's no plea in there. You have a good look at He Whakaputanga and there's no plea in there either. No one wanted protection from Great Britain or the Crown. But we did want to ally. That's what we were up to. Ally, and where it started off with is from foreign poachers poaching in our land. And because we had already developed relationships with Great Britain, we started to move on allying in order to keep poachers out. And it worked. It worked. And then Kohuiarau came along, and we began to develop one of the most amazing economies. We already had a government as far as we were concerned. You can see a lot of the prejudice, a lot of the lack of understanding of our culture, and the simple fact that we had parliament, we had government, we had everything established, but based on our cultural, spiritual, super tribal way of seeing these things. Now, they might not have liked it. The Crown might not have liked it. But, yeah, this is our prerogative. This is our land. If this is our land, then by rights we were able to set up government, set up law, everything like that, in every way that we chose. And there was nothing that the Crown could do about it. Okay? That's the simple fact of the matter. And so what we have managed to understand about a lot of these early influences and the Crown narrative that developed from them is that they pretty much tried to build a picture around TeTiriti and what was resultant from there, around He Whakaputanga also, and what was resultant from there. And that was mostly what they were up to, because what they were looking to do was to bring about a falsified or a flawed understanding or comprehension to the public and internationally about exactly what was going on there. In fact, what was going on in our country. Okay, and what was going on in our country was quite contrary to what they were telling the international public and what they were sharing nationally as well. Okay, and we've already developed that. However, most of our researchers and authors from the Crown as well, and from amongst Pākehā researchers and authors, they haven't been able to develop quite the argument that we have today. Okay, so He Whakaputanga is where we believe that everything to do with TeTiriti and the whole of the setup around TeTiriti began here at He Whakaputanga, and He Whakaputanga was the Declaration of Independence of 1835, encouraged through different discussions with monarchies in Great Britain that commenced as a result of concerns still applicable and from our tūpuna mātua who were particularly worried about certain things in the country. Developing further alliances also gave the monarchy in Great Britain great cause to encourage a declaration of independence, or for the sovereignty, the mana rangatira of our tūpuna mātua to become recognised. And that's where the idea came from. Remember me last week, I mentioned to you, I said to you that e tatauma that we had e tatauma that we had lots of weird stuff going on around these times, around the 1830s, early 1830s, into 1835, and also around TeTiriti, around those times, because you had the Crown of Westminster wanting certain things, like, for instance, he whakaputanga. Okay, the Crown in the country responded to that and said, yeah, okay, we'll put together a declaration and we'll actually work it. But at the same time, they went against the monarchies. I mean, we had a little look at that. Remember from our kōrero last week, where we briefly had a look at that. We talked briefly also around the different areas around the different areas of within the aims, the objectives of he whakaputanga that were all taken up by Busby. His underlying aim, to take this country under British rule. That was his underlying aim. There was no plea for protection from our tūpuna mātua. If there was, then being a native speaker of our reo, and even understanding the reo of the North, the early years of establishment and development of the North, and the modernization of the North, all of that reo we've managed to cover. And we know for a fact it's the reo of the seniorships up there. Not Ngāpuhi, not Awa, not any of those junior tribes. They're in particular, the reo up there was from the most senior, down to probably the 4th and 5th lines. Okay? That's the reo of the North. Okay, and we've covered it all, so there's no way that it could have been a total Ngāpuhi centrally people in the North. Okay, there's no way that could have been the case. Having covered all of the reo up there, and there is no other reo. In the modern day, okay, we get a lot of awa up there. Okay, and that's understandable because awa has been operating up there for years now in the modern day. But when you have a good look at the traditional reo and the traditional forms of reo that were being used, they were in particular moai hapu iwi, teawa hapu iwi, Tahumakakanuimatua o Tutura hapu iwi, and Māmoe hapu iwi, and we do find some moriori up there. Okay, moriori hapu iwi as well. So a lot of the reo up there were in particular their hapu, their uri, who spoke a lot of their hapu reo, and of course the hapu iwi reo up there. You get a good feel for all of that sort of reo up there in the North as well. Okay, so yeah, there's some of the evidence to prove that I know what I'm talking about. If they're talking about Ngāpuhi, and this isn't the first piece of writing that I've read through, I just like that it covers a particular detail that we need to add to our argument. That's all I like. But I'm going to pick on some of those areas, like their focus on Ngāpuhi. Oh, yeah, that's terrible for them to focus on just Ngāpuhi, because they're one of the most junior of the region. Why focus on them? Why focus on them? Okay? It's a little bit obvious. I mean, I can actually answer that question. That question can be answered like this: because Ngāpuhi gave in to them. That's why. And that happened in every region. All of the most junior sort of gathered around the Crown. Why? Because the Crown promised them stuff they wouldn't otherwise get. In the traditional, according to tikanga tika me te kawa, these juniors, these most junior, would never otherwise get what they got promised by the Crown. Okay, and then the Crown built up their cases for tribal establishments in the country, and so Ngāpuhi began to get centralised in the north. Why? Because they gave in, just the same as in our regions. Kahungunu Rangitāne got centralised there. They're a couple of the most junior, same thing happened. Okay, and that's what this document starts off with, by saying in 1831, 13 Ngāpuhi chiefs, and that's all they mention about, tribal things up there. How silly to do that. Because there's loads and loads and loads more tribes up there, and tribes that are not uri, like Ngāpuhi are. Ngāpuhi is uri, whānau uri. Why? Because they have no uretārewa. We've focused on the uretārewa e Tatauma because the uretārewa is the key component in all of our tribes that make us hapu or hapu iwi. Or no matter what stage of hapu that we were at, the hapu, the uretārewa, gave us that authority, that officialization to the hapu existence, and the strength and the mana of the hapu was particularly established from that point in time. Its category, its status was official because of that uretārewa. The uretārewa in terms, one that established a hapu or a hapu iwi, was an uretārewa that was 3 ariki in a row, all of the most senior and all in the direct line from the most senior in their lines. Okay? Or in other words, the paramount dynasty. That's what established officially our hapu, united tribes and all super tribes. Okay? And they became preeminent once they got to a certain stage of around about 8 plus uretārewa that they had established within their particular tribe. Yeah, they had a nickname for that in Tahumakakanuimatua in the mid to late 1700s, and that was the iwi. Okay, that was the iwi. Some of our people accepted that, but most didn't. But it was a vivid description of exactly what that form of tribe was like. Okay, its establishments, and in particular how you would describe that particular tribe. And it was the preeminent among all the tribes. Why? It was always the largest. It always had the toioru. They always were at the forefront. And it always had, within all their lines of descent, the most senior and the central of the paramounts and taiopuru, who were the most powerful, not just through seniority, but also via their connections to that particular line of uretārewa. See? And a lot of our people don't think about things like that. They don't think about that today, about the power and authority that comes with the uretārewa, which is how we establish the hapu. Okay, every stage is important. I'm not saying that the hapu iwi was the only stage of hapu that was important to us. No, every stage of the hapu was important. But in particular, if you're going to say that you have a hapu, you need to have an uretārewa. And if you're going to say that you've got an iwi, then you need, within that iwi, to have 8 plus uretārewa. Okay, that's what we're saying. And we'd be correct in that. Okay, because there's not one hapu iwi in the country, and in fact there's only 7 hapu iwi in the country. Why? Because they were they took so very long to establish, and you basically had to have the gods smiling down on you in order to be able to establish in that fashion the sort of mana, the sort of authority that you could obtain through the connections of the Uratare or the paramount dynasty. Okay? Very, very important, all of that sort of kōrero. Okay? 13 Ngāpuhi chiefs wrote to King William IV of the United Kingdom to seek an alliance and protection from other powers. That's not true. That's not true. They sought an alliance, but they did not seek protection. If it did seem like that, then the interpretation of these particular writers and researchers was incorrect. Because in the reo, if my understanding of the reo is as native as I know it to be, then I would be correct in saying that that's not true. Okay? It wasn't protection that our tupuna wanted, but definitely an alliance that established powers together that would fight off any of the poachers that came into the country. That was part of what was going on over those times towards the establishment especially of Kohuiarau. Okay, what was happening over that time was a lot more to do with the lawlessness and the ways in which the Crown was operating in the country at that time. They weren't too happy with that. With a lot of that came recognition of the King of Great Britain, of the mana rangatira, of our tupuna mātua in the country. And so he furnished a flag. That's the Confederation of United Tribes and or Super Tribes flag that you've seen around with the cross, the St. George cross on there, and in the corner there, the 8-point star. Te mea. Yeah, white in the background, red in the cross, and dark blue in around the stars, and white in the stars. Okay? That is the original flag of the country. Everything was established to build under the Confederation of Chiefs that established as a result. Okay? On 28 October 1835, James Busby took this a step further at a hui, a meeting he called at Waitangi. By the end of the day, 34 rangatira had signed he whakaputanga o te rangatiratanga o New Zealand, known in English as the Declaration of Independence of the United Tribes of New Zealand. Yeah, full stop. Busby had acted partly in response to Frenchman Charles-Philippe de Thierry. Now, we talked a wee bit about the French last week, who had announced plans to proclaim an independent state in Hokianga. Full stop. The self-declared noblemen's claims were in the end easily dismissed, but the fact remained that I keep saying full stop there because I'm getting a little bit used to doing that. I'm just reading through this actually. The self-declared noblemen's claims were in the end easily dismissed, but the fact remained that if Britain did not intervene in New Zealand, another country might do so. We weren't particularly worried about that. Our tupuna mātua weren't particularly worried about that. And I think that's no more exemplary than in the simple fact that the French got taken out in the north. And I checked up, I think there were about 3 or 4 people among the French that got taken out in the north. Okay, so our people were far from afraid, far from looking for protection at all. Okay? Quite to the contrary, we understand And when we look into the kōrero of our tūpuna mātua and understand what they're saying around those times, there was nothing about protection within their kōrero. Okay? We think that the Crown of that time, that the strategy of that time was to try and work our people into a position that could perhaps make us look as though we were looking for that over that time. And though we may have looked slightly like that, I think, on the ground, because we know all of the kōrero going on the ground, everything that was happening on the ground there at Waitangi, everywhere in the country, we know for a simple fact that e tatauma, none of our people were looking for protection at all. Alliances, yes. Deals, contracts, agreements, yes, but nothing to do with protection at all. Okay, what did He Whakaputanga say? There are two versions of the declaration. The English text, created by Busby, and we're going to get a little bit of a look at that later on, to do with the first article there. And the Te Reo Māori, well, they call it Te Reo Māori. The actual Te Reo in He Whakaputanga o Te Rangatiratanga 1835, He Whakaputanga 1835, the actual reo is Reo Hapu Iwi of Moai Hapu Iwi, Tawa Hapu Iwi, Tahumakakanuimatua Hapu o Tutura Hapu Iwi. And we say that because the concepts within that reo are concepts only used from within those three of the iwi, of the Hapu iwi of the north. The actual, and in actual fact there are seven, all seven of the Hapu iwi of the country have united tribes and all super tribes within the north. So all seven Hapu iwi of the country are in the north. From senior to junior, that's Moai Hapu iwi, Tawa Hapu iwi, Tahumakakanuimatua o Tutura Hapu iwi, Māmoe Hapu iwi whānauri, because Māmoe is one of the Hapu iwi of Tahumakakanuimatua. We're the only group that have Hapu iwi within our midst. Okay, we're the only Hapu iwi with other Hapu iwi. So we call that Hapu iwi whānauri, or composite. That's a more customary way of expressing composite. Composite of Tahu. Māmoe are a composite super tribe, Hapu iwi super tribe of Tahumakakanuimatua o Tutura. Okay, and then we have Moriori Hapu iwi. We have, for want of a description, okay, a lot of them like to, especially in Moai, they like to just call it Hapu, and they see that as important. Well, we see it as important to go either way. And the reason for that is if you express Hapu iwi in the way that it should be, then people get to understand exactly what iwi was to our tūpuna mātua, not what it is today. We don't say Hapu iwi because of what it means today. No, we express it in the traditional definition, defining the traditional understanding of what Hapu iwi is. Okay? And Hapu iwi is actually, once you've got a traditional people. Okay? Today they're just about calling anybody a people, and that's, disgustingly not just rebellious, not just takatakahi, ki runga ki ngā tikanga, te tūturutanga o rātau o ngā tūpuna mātua. It's not just takatakahi, a total trespass and disregard for the traditional, but also it is an example as well of the arrogance of some of our people today. They just, because they've grown up with an understanding that is not traditional about what an iwi is, always thought that they've had an iwi. Just because we've actually proven exactly what an iwi is, they are all jumping up and down and being rebellious and being arrogant, and in the main, because primarily now they're not one. Now they're not one. What they should do is actually understand why they're not one and just accept what they are. In some cases, you might be just hapu ureta rewa whānauri. Accept that. There's nothing wrong with that. You might be uri whānau uri. There's nothing wrong with that. The most important thing is that you have the correct, the accurate status of your tribe. Once you have that, then you can develop and establish on what do you call it? Upon trajectories that are pretty well acceptable and that are truthful and factual, rather than continuing on and being rebellious and stuff like that, because what you're going on about isn't factual anymore. You're actually just boasting. Yeah, you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't do that. If you're going to boast within a space like this, you're just belittling your own selves, really, by doing that sort of thing, and especially in a space like this. You need to understand your true status, your factual status, and stick with that. Okay? You get far more points that way than if you just continue to boast onwards. You boast onwards like that, you will lose points and lose points until you have none left. Okay? You lose out, in other words. So best to get things right at the outset, and then you can build from there. Okay? Okay, there are two versions of the declaration: the English text created by Busby, and the te reo, I won't say Māori because there's no such thing, Tuturu, and no such people, Tuturu. Okay, so customarily there's no such thing, and customarily there's no such people. We describe our reo as Māori for lots of different reasons, but one of the reasons are because today we look at our reo as, in particular, one that is of the purity. It's not because it's one reo and it comes from a Māori people. There's no such thing as a Māori people. Okay, so the more and more we go on about that, the more and more blowy that we are being. If we're going to say, we're Māori and we're Tuturu, then you have to come from Rarotonga or the Cook Islands, because actually they're the only ones that are Māori Tuturu in this land. Everybody else, if you're from Tahiti originally, you're definitely not Māori. Okay, and that's why we keep going on about that particular fact. No Māori came out of Tahiti, and the originals actually came from Tahiti, the originals of the country, from Raiatea Tahiti. Okay, and the lands of the Cook Islands and Rarotonga are actually very limited, so we know for a fact that they are not the main people of our country. Okay, it could have been also a ploy by the Crown to try to, in future times, lock us all under that particular understanding, but I can't see that ever working. And if they ever tried, wanted to do that would never ever have worked, and I can't see them actually seeing that ever working, because it would never work. And the reason for that is that the huge majority in this country has always been Raiatea Tahiti. They are the first people from here. That's our people. We're the first people of the country. O moai hapu iwi. Te awa hapu iwi. Tahumakakanuimatua o Tutura hapu iwi. Moriori hapu iwi after Māmoe. Okay? We're the originals. Okay, e tatauma? So, yeah, not one Māori in all of that. Okay? And I think Cook Islands and Rarotonga had a few intermarriages in there amongst some of the junior lines of Awa and amongst some of the junior lines of Te Atiawa as well. In particular, Ngā Rauru, in particular, Te Tini o Awa, and some of those super tribes. Koroatiawa is another one of Awa. And Awa come from Te Tini o Toi, and Te Tini o Toi is Moriori. Yeah. Te Tini o Toi actually come from the Chathams. They are Moriori. Okay? So that's Awa's most direct line of descent, Moriori. Alright? Yeah. And so, wherever they get the idea that everything in the reo is Māori and everything that we deal with within our cultural, spiritual, super tribal way as Māori is kaitehe. Okay? And the Te Reo document that was signed. He whakaputanga, which can be translated as an emergence or declaration, consisted of 4 articles. It asserted that sovereign power and authority in the land, ko te kīngitanga, ko te mana I te whenua, I te wenua, rānei, resided with Te Whakaminenga, the Confederation of United Tribes, and that no foreigners could make laws. Okay? Te Whakaminenga was to meet at Waitangi each autumn to frame laws. And in return for their protection of British subjects in their territory, they sought King William's protection against threats to their mana. Yeah, see, it keeps coming up. Protection. But no one was seeking protection from King William IV. No one was seeking that. I bet you if I asked the people that wrote this stuff to show us where and provide for us the evidence of that, because we know of alliances, we know of partnerships, we know also of agreements to work together for common goals, but we don't know about protection because none of our tupuna had mentioned anything like that. And if there was anything like that, they would have mentioned it, and they haven't. See? It was just some of the agenda that the Crown wanted to push through those times, and that came through the narrative, the Crown narrative, and that has stuck in some of the writings today. It's like what we've got in a lot of the writings between 1904 and 1970, even 1980 in Wairarapa. Most of those writings said it was kahungunu there. See, this is what a Crown narrative looks to try and do, enables itself to do. They take control of the media, they take control of the narrative, and they reinterpret it to suit them. And that's what they were doing with a lot of this stuff. And they wanted us to look like as though that we needed protection. And that's not true. That's not true. Yeah, so Te Whakaminenga was to meet at Waitangi each autumn to frame laws, and in return for their protection of British subjects, for their protection of British subjects in their territory. They sought King William's protection. That's not true. King William's protection against threats to their mana. Yeah, I want them to prove that, because our understanding of what our tupuna mātua were trying to do during those times was quite different to that. Firstly, even during this time, whilst they were doing all these things, the Crown, Busby in particular, in working with this declaration, they were doing all of this and doing things against the king at the same time, like for instance looking to rule out the flag. It was the king that gave the flag over, gifted the flag to our tupuna mātua in order to he was basically recognizing the sovereignty of our tupuna mātua and the independence of our tupuna mātua by gifting that flag. Now, what the Crown was doing in the country, and we know that from all the evidence that we have, they were working against that. See? They were actually out to destroy this flag. They did not want this flag to have mana over anything that they wanted to have in the country. Okay? They wanted to establish a republic of all things. So in other words, what they were saying is that they wanted to get rid of the mana of the monarchy over the country if they ever got to rule over the country, which was something we already know because we've discussed right through our kōrero on TeTiriti or the All Manei or the Magna Carta. One of the struggles, the internal struggles of the country. Okay? The Crown wanted 100% rule over the country. Our tupuna mātua constantly, and did not even change anything in 1840, refused. Okay? They would agree to 50-50, and they would agree to the Crown looking after their people, the Pākehā, and our people looking after ours. Within Kohuiarau, where that was established, migrants or Pākehā could go on either side. It didn't matter. Same for our tupuna mātua. It didn't matter. Whichever side they wanted to be on, they were allowed to. Okay? It sounds like also some people got confused as to what Busby was up to with the declaration. Well, it was encouraged basically by King William, but what they did, in quite weird fashion, what they did, Busby and others, is they sought other means by, ways in which, things that they wanted to develop in the country, and also they wanted to scrap the flag, and obviously they were looking to dupe our tupuna mātua into what was about to follow. Okay? And it worked. It worked. Yeah, they had us interested. They had us thinking about how we could get rid of the lawlessness of the country, how we could get that 50-50 rule. Let's not forget that Kohuiarau is already running and running very, very successfully. So the Crown was trying to work against that as well. So it almost looks like, to the rest of the world, it almost looks like Busby's trying to set up a government, yet there was already a government operating in the country. The Crown was just refusing to be part of it. The other thing was that they didn't like a government established based on tuturu foundations, based on customary foundations of our people. Okay, and it was also a nationally focused government system that was established within Kohuiarau. Okay, funny thing that most researchers and the understanding of Pākehā and Crown writers and authors on these systems from around that time and of exactly what was happening around that time is that what they always do is take the prejudiced view towards any of these systems. And they say, oh, it wasn't a really well-established system. Or it wasn't, and yet it was actually King George that set up Kohuiarau and things like that. They didn't want to recognise it. Anything allied with the British monarchy, they would not support. So weird, what was happening. Before the king, they were supporting all these things, but then, once it came to the actual hui, they weren't so supportive. They had different aims, and the aims that they had were all illegal. Okay, except for the establishment of te wakaminenga, or the whakaminenga, the Confederation, the establishment of the Confederation. They also thanked the king for acknowledging their flag. Look, that is absolute garbage. They weren't thanking the king for anything. Okay? What they did in the declaration is that they acknowledged the king for his he did a massive thing, King William, by gifting our Tupunamatua the actual flag. That would be the flag that would identify the Confederation of Chiefs, who were obviously going to be the central point of mana. See, and all these workings were going against Kohuiarau, which already held that right across the motu. See how they were what they were doing. So yeah, a lot of these illegal aims was Busby and Co working against Kohuiarau, which had already built a massive international following. The mana of Kohuiarau in the world was amazingly powerful and staunch in the world. One of the most established, the biggest economy in the world. We were part of that. Okay, so the industry and technology was working really, really well for our Tupunamatua. Crown representatives in the country didn't like that. They were especially against anything working well established on the customary ways and the customary of our Tupunamatua. It was totally worked against by Busby and Co, who obviously, with the underlying aim of Busby to take the crown, take the country under British rule. Yeah, I laughed at that when I first found that out, because I knew he could never do it. But when I realised actually they had done that via fraud, via a heist, via TeTiriti, or the Old Money, or the Magna Carta, I was not impressed. I was not impressed with that. Okay? So we have the key person. We've nailed him. Within all the writings on He Whakaputanga, you get to learn about the sort of man that Busby was. And he was basically a follower of Captain Cook. So he wanted exactly what Captain Cook wanted. He failed in most cases. And funny thing that we should have this in 50 or more other countries happening in the same fashion. and countries that the Crown took over as well, by stealth, by fraud. Okay? So this declaration built up our tūpuna. It had support from the King. We had the flag gifting. Something very, very special about all those particular events and the flag. That particular part of everything was special, was very, very special. So that meant they could sail around the world and their flag was noticeable to the whole of the international community. Okay. They were not thanking the King for acknowledging their flag. They were acknowledging the King for gifting them the particular flag. Okay. 34 Northern chiefs signed He Whakaputanga on 28 October 1835. Busby sent it to the King, and it was formally acknowledged by the Crown in May 1836. Okay, by 22 July 1839, another 18 chiefs had signed. So, yeah, that's the evidence that we get there, that things happened quite slowly. Okay, 39, 34, 34, 40, yeah. There was around about 50 by 1839 anyway that had signed He Whakaputanga, but things happened gradually and over the years to follow. Uh, 18 chiefs had signed, including Te Hapu of Hawke's Bay. He is a Te Whatuia Piti chief, so one of our teina. And Te Whiro, the Waikato Tainui Ariki, who was to become the first Māori king in 1858. Whatever that is, Māori. Yeah, I think most of our people only hold on to that particular terminology as a terminology to describe us, as over the years, I mean, it's been in for the last couple of centuries, that particular term. So over the years it has meant, for legal reasons, a reference to us as some sort of ethnic people called Māori. Yeah, so for legal reasons I think a lot of our people just go along with it. And it's sad that, because under that they get fully controlled, which is what the Crown wanted in the first place when they brought this terminology and started calling our people, referring our people as Māori. They started to get our people thinking along those lines as years went by. You look at us 2 centuries later, almost, a lot of our people were going around saying they were Māori, and if you looked at their original heritage into the country, most of them are actually from Tahiti, which is not Māori. Okay, there's no Māori people in Tahiti. Okay, not officially, not legally. Okay, so by rights we should be still officially the people that we are under our super tribal names. Like for us, Tahumakakanuimatua or Tutura. For those people of central Moai Hapu Iwi. For those of Tewa Hapu Iwi. For those of Māmoe Hapu Iwi Whānauri. Ara, woia tira. Moriori, you know. And the same goes for all the rest too. Okay? That's who we really are. That's who we really are. That's the traditional view on who exactly we are and who we identify as. Okay? Because these are all the aspects that make us a people. Not Māori. Māori doesn't make us a people. Māori doesn't actually either unite us either. There are a lot of other aspects of our super tribal, spiritual, cultural way that actually unite us. Māori is a concept though. See, there is a concept called Māori, but it's a spiritual one. Okay? It's not one that our ethnicity derives from. Pai te he tēnā. Okay? Yeah. So, for us to be a people that are Māori or from Rarotonga or the Cook Islands, that's tino kai te he. Tino kai te he. Because we know most of the huge majority, in fact, where we have over 2 million to my understanding of our people in the country, look, the percentage of Cook Island Rarotongan of that number would be probably not even anywhere near even 3% or even 4%. Okay? Alright, so yeah, funny thing that would be similar to apartheid, where you got the minority to have the majority rule. Yeah. What we were, our understanding of governance and the way we like to govern over our people, or our views on governance, our political views on how people should be governed over to us. You should take responsibility for the governance over your own people. That's how our tūpuna mātua thought. Okay? And it worked. It worked for our people for centuries. Okay? Why should we have to put up with these newcomers into the country trying to dictate to us that they have a far better way when we already have the tried and true way? Okay? So a lot of what we're going to be doing within Kohuiarau, you can actually see from that, is following a lot of that tried and true way, but also following a lot of that tried and true that comes through into the modern day as well. Okay, we have to take into account the modern day, just as King George did with Kohuiarau in their day. Okay. Busby saw the declaration as a step towards making New Zealand a British possession. See what he was up to? That's true. That's true, because his underlying aim was to take us under British rule. Yeah, funny thing there, eh? He believed it would be the most, quote, be the most effectual mode of making the country a dependency of the British Empire in everything but the name. Full stop, unquote. Busby was also locked in a bitter dispute with Thomas MacDonald, the Hokianga-based additional British resident. See? Against the wishes of Busby, MacDonald had encouraged the Ngatira to ban liquor sales in the Hokianga. For Busby, the declaration was an opportunity to reassert himself at the expense of MacDonald. See, information like that is pretty valuable to us. That helps us understand the real situation for Busby, why he was the way he was, and some of the difficult situations he was in as a result of of events leading up to that time, and also the understanding as to why the events happened in this way, and things were taken through this way, and objectives and aims were focused in the way that they were. I mean, it's pretty obvious, eh? Aroha mai, because of the success of Kohuiarau, pressures on the ground, for want of a better word, aroha mai, they were trying to work out a way to for Busby to achieve his underlying aim. Okay? Or was it just Busby and Hobson? It does look like, though, at the end of the day, that most of the Crown representatives in the country were pretty supportive of what Busby was doing. Okay? Okay, wherever it says Māori intentions, I'm going to use Hapu me ko te ariki. Okay? Hapu me ko te ariki intentions were somewhat different. Okay? And we already understand that. We know the underlying influences of that and what we wanted. The rangatira who signed He Whakaputanga were continuing a tradition of safeguarding their people in the face of rapid change. Yeah, I think they've touched on a pretty important factor there. But it wasn't about the rapid cultural change, it was about some of those areas of the cultural change. Some of those areas proved too difficult for our people to have to work with or stay within over that time. A lot of those areas, like for instance religion, like for instance, some of those things were going to take quite some time before they started to start to take root into in the country. Okay. Perhaps just the simple fact that they were really trying to drive home all these things in the country, some of the cultural differences in the country, because what they were trying to do was force our tūpuna mātua to agree to a lot of it as being far better or far more superior, whereas in fact what it actually was quite the opposite. And this is why our tūpuna mātua were kicking up so much over that time. And I'm pretty certain that is some of the main reasons that they went to see the monarchies. Okay? In the face of rapid change. Yeah, there was rapid change, but in a few areas like religion, politics was another one, governance was another one. The fact that they wanted 100% power in the country, they weren't going to get that, ever. To take that was to take our mana rangatira or our sovereignty, and no one in the world could get that. Okay? Northern Hapu me ko te ariki had been meeting in the Bay of Islands, Hokianga, Whangaroa and Whangarei before 1835 to manage their relationships with Europeans. In contrast to Busby, the signatories saw He Whakaputanga as a way to address the challenges posed by European contact, to strengthen an alliance with Great Britain and to assert their authority to the wider world. See, here we go again. For Ngāpuhi, they say. All this focus on Ngāpuhi, as if to say they're the only tribe of the North. They were certainly central to the Crown, but certainly not the main tribe of the North. For Ngāpuhi, He Whakaputanga emerged out of the meetings of Te Whakaminenga, rather than Te Whakaminenga emerging from He Whakaputanga. Okay? I would argue that wasn't true. I would argue that wasn't true. Because largely, Te Whakamininga is an establishment through He Whakaputanga, because it's in there. Yeah. That's why I said that of the first article. Basically establishes the Whakamininga. It gives it that officiality, that authority. Now, if they were already meeting before then, well, fine. But that didn't give them the official establishment. The official establishment came, the recognised establishment of Te Whakamininga came through He Whakaputanga. That would be correct. Not this particular statement that for ngā puhi He Whakaputanga emerged out of Te Whakamininga. Well, I guess legally it can be argued that would largely have been the case. That would largely have been the case. But the official recognition of Te Whakamininga never came until there was King William's, his support for a declaration, but the actual declaration itself was where they got the recognition for Te Whakamininga from, the official one. Okay? Reactions to the declaration. Busby sent the English text to both the New South Wales government and the Colonial Office in London. Governor Burke of New South Wales referred to the declaration as, quote, a paper pellet fired off at Baron de Thierry, full stop, unquote. Although a Colonial Office official called it, quote, silly and unauthorised, unquote, Lord Gleneagh, the Secretary of State for the Colonies, was more enthusiastic, advising the King that it showed, quote, a due regard to the just rights of others and to the interests of His Majesty's subjects, full stop, unquote. And that's a very good comment, that one. Yeah. The others, I think, yeah, they were getting a confused understanding of exactly what it represented. Why? Because they didn't know really exactly what was happening in the country. That's really the bottom line there. But it was good what the Secretary of State said to the King of that time, to King William. The declaration in practice. No Western-style New Zealand-wide government came into existence as a result of the declaration. Okay, there was only Kohuiarau. Okay, and that wasn't really Western-style. It was a mix of the customary and some of the Western sort of style in there. It was updated to accommodate the incoming people. Okay. As far as Busby was concerned, effective sovereignty lay not with the United Tribes, but with the chiefs of individual iwi and hapu. There we go again, phrases that do not give us a clear indication that these people writing this stuff actually understand what they're talking about when it comes to customary concepts, etc. They speak of iwi, well, that we understand must be the hapu iwi, or the official people amongst our super tribes that became a people, or those that were part of the hapu iwi. We have to understand it in that sort of way, or otherwise it was the hapu iwi whānauri. Okay, and hapu, well, most people have a very limited understanding of hapu as well. They don't realize there's 9 different forms. Okay, 9 different forms of hapu. So you can't really use the word hapu on its own really to describe all of them. I mean, you've got to follow it with kōrero to describe exactly which sort of form of hapu. And I just say, yeah, the different stages. Yeah. If you've got one ure tārewa, you're stage 1, te mea. If you've got 2, stage 2, 3, stage 3, te mea. Of course, when you get to the 8+, you've got Hapu iwi. Okay? And that's without being a composite. Okay? However, ngā puhi, here we go again, mention of ngā puhi. Histories of he whakaputanga note that after 1835, the whakaminenga continued to meet and discuss how to deal with Europeans, even during times of intertribal conflict. We don't know why the Crown actually does that. They elevate the most junior of our cultural, super tribal, spiritual heritage. They elevate them to unbelievable, they're like beyond kingship. Why? Because they are the sole reason that the Crown became a part of this country. Those very juniors gave them a foot in the door. Okay? And that's why they do that, but that's illegal. Now, why they do that, we don't know, because it doesn't hide the illegality of anything. But if they're trying to make it seem like it's legal so that they can establish and move within their processes within a justified manner, they're wasting their time. Because when you look over customary law, they have no basis from which to establish that. I mean, because you can't do that customarily based on just their juniorship. See? You need the support of the seniorships. See? You got no support of seniorships, you'll had it. And they would have known that. So the Crown of today needs to have a good look at the way that they're operating, because we're quite sure that it's ultimately very, very illegal, the way that they operate in the country today, especially in our regions. None of our people officially signed TeTiriti on behalf of Tahumakakanuimatua or Tutura. We refused to. In fact, all the most senior refused to. Okay? We understood what was happening and we said, no, forget it. Forget your treaty, you're promising too much and we're guaranteeing you that you cannot deliver, and they didn't. All the promises to these juniors, they got nothing. What makes these juniors think that today they're going to get everything? What a laugh. What a laugh. From what we can see, there are still government and Crown agenda going on in the country, and it needs to cease. And Hapu iwi need to be given back control of their people and their land, the actual land and people that this Crown embodiment of whatever they represent, and the process by which they work in the system that they represent needs really, in reality, to shut down, because they've destroyed our country. They haven't done anything good with this country. Okay? The only ways in which our people have actually got anywhere in this country is through their own ingenuity, through their own resilience. Nothing to do with the Crown, nothing to do with government. Okay, a lot of these claims and settlements are giving us a chance at that, but a little 1% to 3% chance, that's all. That's not good enough. That's not good enough. We're saying the whole 100% is what we deserve, and before long that's what we're going to take. Okay. Interpretations of the declaration. So the significance of he whakaputanga has been widely debated by historians in recent years. Most Pākehā writers viewed it as an attempt by Busby to establish with little or no Hapu me ko te ariki input a settled form of government, quote unquote, and dismissed its significance. Keith Sinclair described the Declaration's recognition of Indigenous sovereignty as a, quote, polite fiction, unquote, while Michael King maintained that the Declaration, quote, had no reality since there was no national Indigenous power structure within New Zealand, full stop, unquote. And that's false. That's untrue. Te whakaminenga o TeRunangaKoHuiarau was that Indigenous national structure in the country. Notice how they just conveniently ignore all those sorts of things like they're a nullity or they don't exist. Te mea. I can't stand picking up these sorts of things because these sorts of things in writings show us the prejudice of the writer and the prejudice of the people being talked about here. See? There's also racial discrimination in that, the total avoidance of such structures as Kohuiarau in the country, which was working very, very powerfully worldwide. It was a very, very, not just weird time, where the weirdness of the Crown operations against their own, quite strange. But it was also a very, very evil time in the country. So the feudal nature of the culture that the incoming people had brought into the country was looking to eventually take over, but by stealth, by fraud, and through the very heist that we have been discussing over these past few months. Okay. So Michael King is incorrect in there. Submissions to the Waitangi Tribunal have challenged this perspective. Good. Assertions of Hapu me ko te ariki agency in the making of he whakaputanga and explanations of their reasons for signing have shed new light on the document. A greater awareness of Hapu me ko te ariki forms of governance has also changed how te whakaminenga has been viewed. Largely why I'm being a little bit of a nitpicker to some of this kōrero. Because we need that. Largely our people just don't know. And that's why I do that sort of thing, so that our people can know what they don't know. Okay? A greater awareness of Hapu me ko te ariki forms of governance has also changed how te whakaminenga has been viewed. Decisions were made in a cooperative way and with respect for the autonomy of Hapu. Okay? According to Nuki Aldridge, quote, te whakaminenga could make decisions or create laws with Hapu consent, but not override Hapu authority, which was acknowledged and recognised and worked through Kohuiarau. Okay? So te whakaminenga was not trying to override Kohuiarau, but in fact work things in a way that it all could fall into alignment with Kohuiarau. Okay? He whakaputanga became a foundation for the assertion of Indigenous rights and was another step towards a formal constitutional relationship with Britain. Okay, that's quite true. Tom Brooking argued that the Colonial Office accepted the Confederation of United Tribes as bestowing, quote, indisputable, unquote, Hapu me ko te ariki, quote, title to the soil and the sovereignty of New Zealand, full stop, unquote. For many, though, the declaration was primarily a matter for Ngāpuhi. Why that is, I do not know. That's a strange one. The reo is not Ngāpuhi. If they weren't the only tribe with chiefs, so I gather, they were the most junior there. So why only the Ngāpuhi? This is the strange thing I find about a lot of the Pākehā authors. What they tended to do is, all Crown authors, Crown researchers and people like that, what they tended to do was side immediately with the narrowed view, firstly, and secondly, with the view that aligned with the Crown narrative. And that was it. That's what they always do. Quite a strange thing to do too, I believe, because actually they do that without even checking or rechecking or reality checking even that their information was correct. And most times, 9 times out of 10 or 99 times out of 100, they were on quite the wrong track. Okay. Some historians suggest that the declaration was only taken seriously by the British in 1840, when it proved to be an impediment to the annexation of New Zealand. Before sovereignty could be transferred to the British Crown via the Treaty of Waitangi, the declaration had to be revoked. Now, before sovereignty could be transferred to the British Crown via the Treaty of Waitangi, there was no agreement to that from any of the chiefs. There was no agreement to anything like that. See how all this is starting to fit in? The whole basis of our argument is based on the facts. And because we have the facts, anything that comes up like this, we're able to argue against it. We're able to argue for what was really happening over that time and what really mattered to our tūpuna mātua. And what was not on the minds of our tūpuna mātua was transferring sovereignty. That was not on the minds of our tūpuna mātua at all. In fact, it was probably the least thing they ever would have even considered important to the entirety of that hui in 1840 on February 6th, at the first hui for TeTiriti. Okay? Others argue that the declaration had to be revoked. This is why the chiefs who had signed the declaration or their successors were the first men to be called up to sign the treaty. Okay? You understand that? Because the declaration had to be revoked. Hard case, eh? Hard case. But it was the way in which they got our tūpuna, into the position where they would have been open to the entreatment of February 6, 1840. Others argue that this view downplays the constitutional importance of he whakaputanga, and it does. It does. Constitutionally, for Hapu meko te ariki, it means everything, he whakaputanga. And especially the establishment of te whakaminenga. Okay? It means everything. I know of some politicians today who have viewed he whakaputanga 1835 as a document worthy of scrapping. That's crap. That's crap. To scrap he whakaputanga would be to scrap some of the greatest areas of evidence of the huge heist that took place. I mean, you can see that, eh? a lot of that kōrero is coming up all the time that is relative to that particular heist and the way that they went about it and the way that they manipulated everybody through the contents of TeTiriti, the old mani, the Magna Carta. Okay. Others argue that this view downplays the constitutional importance of Hewhakaputanga and its influence in the Hapu me ko te ariki world. Vincent O'Malley notes that later Hapu me ko te ariki unity movements, such as the Kiingitanga and the Kotahitanga, looked to Hewhakaputanga as the basis for Hapu me ko te ariki claims to self-determination. It also represented an important development in a Hapu me ko te ariki sense of nationhood and identity, while reaffirming tikanga Hapu me ko te ariki and Hapu me ko te ariki concepts of power and decision making. Okay. E tatama. So we have some quite interesting detail there on the events leading up to and around the actual signing of Hewhakaputanga, the declaration. And I'm just going to go to our copy of the actual document and our translation as well, and also to Busby's translation, so that we get a good look at the English version of Hewhakaputanga, and the simple fact, e tatauma, that in the process of the signing of this document, some of the reasons that it was slow and a lot less successful than TeTiriti was because the tūpuna mātua pretty much had not been duped yet. They weren't duped in. They were pretty much being prepared. They were being groomed, in other words. Groomed for the TeTiriti that was about to come. To take away this document and all the events surrounding it, and even the illegal movements of the Crown during this time. I mean, they couldn't help themselves, hey? They were absolute criminals. Busby, for one, is one of the major criminals. How they could believe that we handed these criminals our sovereignty is a real slap in the face. I find that offensive. I find that highly offensive. We'd never hand our sovereignty to any criminals willingly or wholeheartedly. Now, these people were criminals. Yeah. They were absolute criminals. Especially Busby. We can point to him as an absolute criminal, but I guarantee you Hobson is pretty close behind him. Okay. And we have lots of different copies this time of the translations of Hewhakaputanga, but we're going to concentrate in particular on the English version written by James Busby. Yeah, and you'll see by our focus on the English version how we know that in actual fact that's what Busby started off with, was an English version, and then he looked to translate that or get it translated, no doubt utilizing the missionaries in order to do that. And I already know that we're almost coming up to time. We started slightly early today too. This is another of the difficulties, is finding that we're actually during the course of our kōrero, when we've only got 2 hours to do our kōrero, finding ourselves without enough time to get through everything. So, but yeah, we have the English version here of the He Whakaputanga document. It's a very important document because it constitutes a foundation from which the TeTiriti document could be established. Okay, there were grounds for that. There were grounds all of a sudden for the entreatment, of TeTiriti to take place. Okay, what they did not say to our tūpuna mātua is what they were aiming to do was transfer the sovereignty of the country into British hands. If they had said that, no one would have signed. Okay, do you understand that? Do you understand that? So strange and weird times, but very, very evil times. They were evil times. Because slowly, gradually, but surely, we were unlawfully being taken over. Okay? Which began officially. Unlawfully it was happening in the country for 98 years, so that's prior to TeTiriti. Then on the time of TeTiriti it officially had been, secured in place. Okay. They even say it in here. The English text was drafted by British resident James Busby for the 28 October 1835 signing. It was then translated into Te Reo Moai Hapu Iwi, Te Awa Hapu Iwi, Tahumakakanuimatua Tutura Hapu Iwi. That's whose reo that is. Okay? Iwi reo is totally different to what we term as Te Reo Māori. Hapu Iwi reo is something quite different, quite again. Yes, there is Māori in it, but it is not the total makeup and consistency of such a reo. Okay, and that's what you have here. You have reo Hapu Iwi. So James Busby did that, and it was translated into Te Reo by Henry Williams and written out by Iriwera Parehungi. Busby dispatched the English text to both the New South Wales government and the Colonial Office in Brisbane. In Britain, sorry, not Brisbane. Okay, the Declaration of Independence of New Zealand. It set the stage for everything. Okay, it didn't do it very successfully, but it did get the attention of some of the chiefs. Okay, it did get the attention of some of the chiefs. We're going to look at the difference between our translation and their translation. Okay, so they've gone and translated, and they've actually opened up on that. I didn't realize that they did that. They've actually opened up on that, and they've actually gone off an English translation into Te Reo. It's just that if they didn't do that, the Te Reo version would have been far better established, far better written, and with far greater quality reo than what there is otherwise, which could have changed the scene quite much for the success of He Whakaputanga. But what you can see there, I mean, especially with the establishment of a republic, how illegal, how criminal could that be? That would mean to say to get rid of the king's mana over anything in the country. And he already had express mana. He had express mana in Kohuiarau. He now had expressed mana for calling that a declaration of independence and the recognition of the mana rangatira of our chiefs and our hapu me ko te ariki, deserved that particular acknowledgement, and therefore that's what gave birth to this initially. But remember those three things that they were looking to establish quite illegally. Okay? Remember those three things they were looking to establish quite illegally. The Republic, they were officializing the Confederation, te whakaminenga. The flag was being recognized. Look, we need to have a good look at the different versions of the English that we have here, because what you find is that the te reo is quite a fair way off, quite a fair way out of context to what is actually being said in the English there. Okay, so let's have a look at the English text of Busby. This is what it says in the te reo. Ko mātou, 1 dot, ko mātou, the first article, ko mātou, ko ngā tino rangatira o ngā iwi o nūti rene i raro mai o hauraki, kua oti nei te huihui I waitangi I tokerang 28 o Ketopa 1835 full stop. Ka waka puta I te rangatiratanga o tō mātou wenua. Ka mea tia ka waka puta ia e mātou he wenua rangatira. Full stop. Kia huaina. Quote, ko te waka minenga o ngā hapu o nūti rene. Full stop, unquote. Okay, and we've said that says 1 dot. We, the hereditary chiefs and heads of the preeminent united tribes and or super tribes of New Zealand to the north of Hauraki, having just reached unanimous consensus in this here at Waitangi in the Northern Territories on the 28th of October 1835, full stop, do solemnly declare our land sovereign, independent and interdependent, so whilst acknowledging and recognizing them constitutionally sovereign, independent and interdependent lands, full stop, as at / were, under the auspices of the designated, quote, ko te waka minenga o ngā hapu o nūtireni, unquote, or the, quote, Confederation of Chiefs and the United Tribes and all super tribes of New Zealand, full stop, unquote. Okay, that's if we consider every context in te reo there. Okay, that's why ours is ever so more, how shall we put it, literal than Busby's translation. Why? Well, one of the reasons was because obviously Busby started off with the English and then looked to translate it afterwards. Okay. With assistance there, obviously, of missionaries, and obviously there were northern tūpuna involved with that. Edwina Parehungi, I'm not too sure whether he was, whether he had become a disciple amongst the missionaries or whatever he might have been, but he certainly is noted here as having given a hand in things over that time. Okay? And Busby says, We, the hereditary chiefs and heads of the tribes of the northern parts of New Zealand, being assembled at Waitangi, in the Bay of Islands on this 28th day of October, 1835, declare the independence of our country, which is hereby constituted and declared to be an independent state, under the designation of the United Tribes of New Zealand. Full stop. It sounds like its main aim was to be straightforward and very, very clear. This is what he started off with, remember? This is what he really was aiming to do, was bring to the signing a straightforward statement, a delivery, an authorized and an officialized declaration that was straightforward and clear. Okay? In the reo, that is actually not the case. And remember back when we were talking around TeTiriti a number of weeks ago, I mentioned that the declaration itself is not as clear in te reo as it is in TeTiriti. Okay? So that gives you a little bit of an idea. I mean, this is our reo. Obviously, our translation is a lot closer to the actual literal meaning of what this is saying in te reo. Okay? Whereas what they've got here is a very direct, very clear English translation. But when you understand that actually what they had was the English, the reo translation coming after the English version of He Whakaputanga, you get to understand why there are differences in the actual literal meanings coming through the te reo. Okay? Okay? We believe they did the same thing with TeTiriti. Okay? Though their reo got slightly better, there is no doubt to us that the reo in the TeTiriti document was far clearer, far more open and universal than actually. And then when you get to look at te reo Hapu iwi, I mean, its original status, its customary status, is to not be in that way inclined. Okay, so perhaps they were still learning about te reo Hapu iwi in this time, in 1835. And once they had learnt plenty about it, the TeTiriti went so much better. Okay, so they got 34 signees, and then slowly in drips and drabs they got another 18, or whatever the number was. Okay, see the difference? See the difference though? We have provided the only, again, literal translation of this document. Okay, and again, we've crossed out all the translations since 1835 as correct, accurate, defining translations of the actual kōrero in te reo. Okay, one of the reasons for that, obvious, is that we've obviously cottoned on to what one of the reasons are, and one of the reasons is that they started off with English and went into te reo. Okay, the missionaries and their helper would have been just learning how to do things like that. That's what I mean. So if they were looking to translate that English into Te reo, they didn't do a very good job at translating the context around that English. See, so the reo should have come out a lot more direct, a lot more clearer. Yeah, when you look at that reo Pākehā, when I think about it, it's such a clearer deal, isn't it? It's such a clearer statement there. We, the hereditary chiefs and heads of the tribes of the northern parts of New Zealand, being assembled at Waitangi, in the Bay of Islands. That's not what this says. Ko mātou, ko ngā tino rangatira o ngā iwi, onu tireni, I raro mai o hauraki, kua oti nei te hui. When you kua oti nei te hui, you have consensus. That's what that says. Okay? Yeah. Kua oti nei te hui. I mean, to hui, if they're trying to say we met, there's quite a lot of areas we can discuss further with this particular document that changes the context of things very, very well. Was this document still a document that was criminally organised, etc., etc., etc.? Of course it was. Of course it was. So we need to hold on to the importance of understanding that. Now, this was worked by criminals, but it had a different aura about it. It had a whole different aim. Its aim was to dupe and to groom. Okay? Did it work? Well, not so successfully, but it worked. It worked. In the end. Okay? Okay, not a lot of chiefs ended up signing in the end, but they got enough there to say that they had a confederation of chiefs that were agreeable that their mana rangatira being declared and recognised worldwide was a very, it was a highly prestigious and a very good thing. And that was about to be taken further into TeTiriti. Okay? Our translation is a lot closer to a translation of the te reo of this document. When you think about it, and why our people took so much time to sign this document, is that it's not so straightforward. It isn't when you read it in te reo. And remember, most of them couldn't speak English, couldn't read, and all they would have heard was ko mātou, ko ngā tino rangatira o ngā iwi. They would have frowned at that, most of them. Onu tireni, they would have frowned at that. I raro mai o hauraki kua oti nei te huihui. I waitangi I tokerau 28 Uokoeko 1835, full stop. Okay, to oti nei te huihui is the consensus. And we're talking unanimous. So, when they translated this English, it's highly likely that part of the reason that our people got duped eventually into the 1840 signing was because of the nature of the reo and what it was actually saying, something quite different, obviously, to what the English was saying. The English was giving us a straighter deal than what we actually had. The reo was saying that a lot more had been decided on and done already. Okay, we were unanimously agreeable already. Okay, and we solemnly declare our lands sovereign, independent and interdependent. So, whilst acknowledging and recognizing them constitutionally sovereign, independent and interdependent lands. Full stop. It's not as clear-cut as this English says. Okay? So, yeah, I guess it was a little bit manipulative, but it said a bit more than actually the English says. You know, that's a little bit of a word on and a little bit of a sign that they, by doing this with this document, were getting used to being able to misappropriate in the process of using information or delivering information, or there's a particular lack of transparency in that whole transfer of what they were saying in Te Reo, which the tūpuna mātua, which the chief signed, compared to what actually they were saying in the English. Okay, again, we are sticking with our translation, because the English in this case is still not good enough. The translation is absolutely not good enough. And in fact, every translation we've looked at, even Mānuka Hinares, a very good researcher, not good enough. All of the translations over the last 2 centuries have been counted out by us. We are the only people, descendants to the indigenous reo of this document, that have translated this document. Okay? And in our professional view, all past translations have not done that accurately, and do not define these words expertly and exactly and professionally enough to be able to accept them as accountable to an accurate translation of this document. This is what our tūpuna mātua signed. This is what they signed. We, the hereditary chiefs and heads of the preeminent United Tribes, So was Busby practicing here? Was he rehearsing the TeTiriti? I think so. I think he was, partly. I think it was partly rehearsing TeTiriti, exactly what he wanted to do. See, because he started off with the English, he translated it into Te Reo, and the Te Reo said something totally different to what the English actually says. See, I'll read the English out of his translation again. 1. We, the hereditary... Aroha mai e tatauma. I'll just remembered I've got my water here today. Yeah, sometimes I don't look to see whether I've got it or not, but I've got it there. I'll just finish this part off, but yeah, we think he was rehearsing for TeTiriti, and he practiced actually putting what he wanted to put into English in the first article. We'll just focus on the first article for now, and look at the simple fact he put it into English and then got his translators to translate, but to give a totally different translation, and see how that falls in line with what they want to achieve in future. They didn't have a date by that time. Okay, for TeTiriti, what they wanted to achieve. If you can see the clear indications, they were symbolic to what was about to happen with TeTiriti. Okay? Where the English version was totally different, but they manipulated lots and lots of different parts. They were highly manipulative in most parts. And they knew it was going to work. Why? Because, in actual fact, it worked like a breeze with he whakapitanga. Okay, do you understand that? Okay, this is what he says. It's clear and direct. We, the hereditary chiefs and heads of the tribes of the northern parts of New Zealand, being assembled at Waitangi, this is what he says, in the Bay of Islands on this 28th day of October 1835, declare the independence of our country, which is hereby constituted and declared to be an independent state under the designation of the United Tribes of New Zealand. It's not that clear-cut in the deal. It's not that clear-cut at all. When you translate all the contexts and you produce its literary definitions. Okay? Okay? So we think he was rehearsing for TeTiriti. He knew after he had done this, and especially by 1838, 1839, he knew exactly how he was going to operate TeTiriti. No doubt they had a date set. No doubt they knew exactly what they wanted to do. It was that part that they probably did within the three days leading up to Waitangi. They worked out how they were going to manipulate the whole thing. That's all they worked out. But everything else took this whole time from between around about 1838, 39 into 1840. Okay? And let's remember, all of this is going towards illegal means, towards a heist of massive proportions. Okay, let's not lose focus on that. TeTiriti was a fraud. And it was a fraud that was established and our people were groomed towards from this particular document. And that's not hard to see how the understandings are quite different to what were being stated as understandings through the Declaration of Independence in Busby's version are quite different. Okay, here's what we translated it as in the literal translation of the context of the te reo. 1. We, the hereditary chiefs and heads of the preeminent United Tribes. Do you notice what that does to this whole document? It ropes all 7 iwi into this document. See, he doesn't say that in the English. Of the tribes of the northern parts of New Zealand. That's all he says. Cunning, eh? Cunning, eh? And I think the northern tribes for a long time have been fooled into that, into thinking that this document only refers to the northern parts or the northern tribes of New Zealand. That's not true. In referring to the northern tribes of New Zealand, in actual fact, this document was referring to the whole of the country. But in fact, it wanted to secure interest of the whole of the 7 iwi of the country. That's what it wanted. The whole of the 7 hapu iwi that we spoke about earlier. Okay? So quite... how can I put that? It's quite deceiving, eh? Quite deceiving the way Busby has done that. But in doing that, he realised, oh wow, we've got these people. We've got them sussed. Okay? The reo is a bit closed, and we make that statement based on the simple fact that it's far more hapu iwi, this reo. That they're using in this document. They lessen that in TeTiriti. Quite a different. You get more of the concentration on the Hapu iwi areas of Te Reo in the declaration. So in terms of a duping document, this document had it sussed. Okay? But it wasn't that successful. But they tried it because they knew that in the end it would do exactly what they wanted it to do. Okay? And they wanted to dupe and groom. And that worked. Was it as successful as TeTiriti? Far from it. Far from it. Okay? We, the hereditary chiefs and heads of the preeminent united tribes and all super tribes. That's what they're saying in Te Reo. That's what it says. It does not say, and heads of the tribes of the northern parts of New Zealand. That's not what it says. Okay? We need to be more aware of factors as this, of facts as well as these. Okay, there's a huge difference in Te Reo here. And we're going to discuss that a bit further when we come back into Wairarapa after we discuss whānau and what whānau isn't. Okay? What whānau is and what family is not. When we get back into TeTaiHauauruAukatitai or the hawhāua mō e tātou mā. And we will discuss this article a bit further and the deceiving nature of this article. We will discuss, I'll discuss a little bit about the Hapu iwi content in this document, but I'm not going to discuss everything. But part of that nature and those characteristics is why this was not as successful. Okay? Very closed, very hapu iwi, very matatapu, in other words. So a lot of the confidential nature of Reo Hapu is in here. Okay, totally different document, eh? Yet it purports in the English of Busby to be stating a clear and direct message, a clear and direct agreement, a clear and direct acknowledgement and recognition, an official statement that states all these things. Well, this is what it actually says in the Reo. 1. We, the hereditary chiefs and heads of the preeminent united tribes, or the Hapu iwi, and all super tribes of New Zealand to the north of Hauraki, having just reached unanimous consensus in this here at Waitangi in the Northern Territories on the 28th of October 1835. Full stop. Do solemnly declare our land sovereign, independent and interdependent, so whilst acknowledging and recognising them constitutionally sovereign. This is why they've got a lot of their commas and full stops, etc., 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 all mixed up. Did you hear all my full stops and commas? Well, there's none of that in the original English document. There's none of that. Why? Because they're two totally different documents. Hard case, say. How much more criminal could they be? I mean, even in the declaration they were criminal. They were definitely out to heist this country. And with an underlying aim like Busby's, what else were they going to do? There was no way our tupuna were going to hand over sovereignty or transfer sovereignty just like that. There was no way that that was going to happen. So this document, the operations of this document in exactly the way he operated at Busby, and in the translations and the differences, the huge differences, what we get is, in the end, a total deceiving of exactly how establishments guaranteed exactly what the Crown was looking to achieve over that time. And that was the Republic, that was the Confederation, and also the simple fact that they were grooming our tupuna mātua into later treatment that were going to mean the whole of this official recognised mana rangatira was going to be pulled into question. Was it going to stand up officially as well in the entreatment to come? And of course it did, and we all know that, hey? And of course our seniors took a stand, and they disappointed the Crown in that stand. Okay, but good on them. I'm really happy with our seniors and the stance that they took against the Crown over that time. Realistically, we didn't get ripped off. We still got ripped off, but yeah, realistically, we didn't sign anything away. So realistically, legally, this land is still majoritarily belonging to the seniorships. Okay? Well, wherever we have land, yeah. Most of our land we still own. Because the land of actual juniorships, when you have a good look at that, the percentage of juniorships land, around about 30% of that land only. So legally, when you look at it, at TeTiriti, those that signed TeTiriti only signed away 30% of it. So the Crown actually, yeah, in legal terms, the Crown actually only has right over 30% of the country. Although they're holding legally, under different auspices, all our lands, the management of our lands, by rights, legally, they're only holding 30% because only 30% was signed away, because it was the juniorships that held that. A lot of that would have been the worry on the minds of the Crown who stayed in the north during that 7 months to follow the first signing. They would have been worried about how things were going to affect that in the future. Okay? And we do think that, further claims need to be laid against the Crown, because the Crown is actually operating illegally, not just in our lands, but everyone else's too. And they need to be shut down. They need to be got out of there, and need to realise that those super tribes, for a start, that did not sign TeTiriti by rights, they cannot operate legally in their lands. Secondly, where juniors are concerned in those lands, they only had about 30% of those lands. Okay, that's a very minute amount compared to exactly the size of a lot of our lands. Yeah. Silly though that people like Busby would do things like this. He would be deceiving and manipulative and actually be acting criminally in the country when, isn't it ironic, when our tupuna mātua were complaining time and time again about the lawlessness in the country, and here are Crown representatives actually being lawless in the country. Were they out to stop the lawlessness? No way. It was helping them to infiltrate the very fabric of our Tutura society, our customary society, was being corroded and broken down and eroded by these ways of operating in our country from 1769 onwards. The Crown presence in this country was destroying the fabric of our society. Okay, and they were doing that purposely, and it's obvious. It's obvious. Okay, so we'll talk further on that first article, and then we'll move on to the second article. But exactly how we've translated it is exactly what that says. Okay, and we've got all the punctuation correct. Okay, so I'll just start that again. 1. We, the hereditary chiefs and heads of the preeminent united tribes and or super tribes, so that's all 7 hapu iwi of New Zealand to the north of Hauraki, not the heads of the tribes of the northern parts of New Zealand. That's not what this says. Okay? To the north of Hauraki, having just reached unanimous consensus in this here at Waitangi in the Northern Territories on the 28th of October 1835, full stop, do solemnly declare our land sovereign, independent and interdependent, so whilst acknowledging and recognizing them constitutionally sovereign, independent and interdependent lands, full stop, as at and or / were under the auspices of the designated, quote, ko te wakaminanga ngā hapu o New Tireni, which is the official name, obviously, of te wakaminanga o New Tireni, unquote, or in the translation, quote, the Confederation of Chiefs and the United Tribes and or Super Tribes of New Zealand, full stop, unquote. Notice how we did that twice there, because we wanted our translation to be in full. Okay, because that's what it actually says. That's what it says in te reo. Okay, so we put both meanings so that you have the clear understanding of exactly what it says. The official name of the wakaminenga is ko te wakaminenga o ngā hapu o New Tireni, quote unquote. Or, and then in the translation, quote, the Confederation of Chiefs and the United Tribes and or Super Tribes of New Zealand, full stop, unquote. Okay, Father Lord, we note the evidence, we note to where you're bringing us to in terms of the events and exactly on the ground what was happening exactly for our tūpuna mātua around the declaration, and how we were being groomed, Father Lord, to be taken by TeTiriti. The whole of the organisation around that was quite noticeable, Father Lord, especially in terms that once you get to the translations of the declaration, it becomes clear that a certain amount of deceit was involved in the stuping. Okay, Father Lord, we thank you for opening our eyes to these things. We know that you were there for this as well. And we know that you noted it, that a lot of these falsifications and deceitful dealings with Crown representatives over those times only happened in the country. And they happened in the country within an atmosphere that was full of lawlessness. The Crown's obvious aims were to continue that lawlessness. Why? Because they knew the utter damage and corrosion that it was going to be doing and able to do to the fabric of our society, our civil society. Okay, it had a law system, Lord, that was repugnant and occult, but still everything else around that was civil. That was not the central or the be-all and end-all of our culture, our spirituality, or indeed our super-tribal way of life. It was not the centre of everything. However, Lord, as it was a part of our tūpuna mātua that was disagreeable to you, we denounce all of that. And we agree to all of that. But then again, the crown, Father Lord, in Jesus' name, should have only focused on that and left the rest of our culture alone. No, they wiped out just about the whole lot of it. Which is very, very sad. And not just racial, but typical of Western theory and feudal societies of that time. So, Father Lord, we pray as we move through this document and discuss it in depth, that you bring us to the fuller understanding of exactly what was happening over that time as our tūpuna mātua were being groomed for TeTiriti. They remained disagreeable to the transfer of sovereignty, if ever that came up over that time, and it never, to our understanding. Funny they should mention it in the details of this piece of writing that I read to our viewers today. Funny they should mention that, because that was never mentioned in TeTiriti, and right through this document it's never mentioned in there either. Why? Because our tūpuna would have been totally disagreeable to any such thing. Thank you, Lord, that you are strengthening us and strengthening us more and more as time goes on, and opening our eyes to the exact details to exactly what was happening over those times. We need to understand that a lot better and forget this crown narrative that serves only to deceive and misguide and reinterpret exactly what was happening for us over those times. Sad, isn't it, Lord? Lord, the fact that you're bringing us to the point where we can suddenly be able to be restored to our rightful place in our country. That rightful place that you blessed us with, Father Lord. I'm so thankful. I honour you and exalt you high above all else, because what you do is always so very honourable, Father Lord, and you stick to your word. You make no promise that you can't keep, and we exalt you upon high, higher than all else in the world. Father Lord, thanks and praises in Jesus' mighty name. Amen. Ka piti ona ka tātai hono, ko rātau nā te mate ki a rātau. Ka piti ona ka tātai hono, ko tātau mā anō tēnei tonu anō tātau kua, ko te kānuhiora ki a tātau mātau kua. Kai te mihi atu tēnā rā tātau Māori ora. Ka huri